I've been feeling a little creatively stunted recently, but I've also been watching a lot of Mad Men and taking inspiration from Betty Draper's wardrobe. So I dug into my stash of vintage patterns and I decided to, just for fun, give this 1960s dress a go. It looks like this is actually a junior's pattern. So the sizing was quite small. I think it's for like a 31-inch bust. I need to add a couple inches to the bust and I'll just like not gather the skirt as much, but I'm going to make the dress that is the sleeveless version. Thankfully, all of the pattern pieces are still in the box, so that won't be an issue. Deciding between fabrics, I have this cotton vintage curtain with this crazy frill on the bottom, which I'm going to seam rip off because I think is a bit much. The other option I was considering was this embroidered tablecloth, which is also gorgeous, but I decided against it because it's like a heavier linen and I didn't think the gathers would look as good with it. This is also a wildly impractical project right now because currently it's 50 degrees outside in the dead of winter in Austin. So here I am adding a 1/2 inch to the back bodice piece. Adding a 1/2 inch to the side seam will ultimately add a whole inch because it's being duplicated on the other side. I'm going to do the same to the front bodice piece as well when I get to it. So here I am cutting out the scarf pattern piece and then the front pattern piece. I had the facings laid out on my fabric, but honestly I really hate facings. They're so common in vintage patterns, but I decided to just do a bias tape finish for the neckline and for the armholes. So I skipped that and just went straight to adding the 1/2 inch onto the front bodice piece. I made some bias tape using an old bed sheet and it's in a similar shade of white as the backdrop of this fabric, so that's going to work out nicely. And then lastly, I'm just going to cut out all of these skirt panels, and this is a hella gathered skirt, so it required a lot more yardage than I was actually expecting. And I had to sacrifice a couple of inches on the gathering because I didn't quite have enough. So here's all of my pattern pieces and the bias tape. First I'm going to work on those darts, and on vintage patterns there are tons of darts. There's 2 on the front and there are 2 darts on the back as well, one on the shoulder and then one on the waist. As I was finishing this front bodice piece, I was noticing that the bust is looking a little conical, if you know what I mean. Those vintage patterns, like the boobs and the bras were so weird back then. I might make an adjustment to that to where it's not quite as sharp. So I attached the collar. I'm going to use bias tape to finish it. It's looking like this. The neckline is like super high. It's like a bit more conservative than I would like, so I'm going to trim the neckline. Is he whining? Didn't get the buttons done, but the tie is attached. These bust cups are like kind of pointy, which I'll have to figure out what to do about that. But it's looking good. Back darts. Once I sewed all of the skirt panels together, now I'm going to gather it. The first time I went about doing this was really not the smartest way. I was just kind of on autopilot, but I used regular thread for this super long skirt and I tried to gather it, but predictably the thread kept breaking. So I switched to upholstery thread, which I highly recommend, and it's also smarter to just gather it in panels rather than all as one piece. Not sure what my plan was there, but the upholstery thread came through and that worked out. So then finally I'm just going to attach the hella gathered skirt to the bodice. And as you might know, it's very important to make sure that the gathers are looking very evenly distributed here. Sewing on skirts, like gathered skirts, it's really such a touch and go thing. I feel like I'm like sewing in bursts. It's like sew super fast for 2 seconds, let off, adjust the gathers, so on. After I touched it with the sewing machine, now I'm just going over it with the serger, and this is the only spot that I used a serger. Everywhere else I opted for French seams because I wanted that nice clean finish, but I didn't think bias tape would work super well on this seam, so I just opted in for the serger. And then lastly, here I am just adding the buttonholes and the buttons. This is how she turned out. It's so fun, even though I'm not really sure where I would wear this to. Maybe on some kind of a like summer date or daytime outing just for funsies. But I paired it with my cowboy boots for a little polka vibe. I love the necktie. That might be my favorite element of this. It's so vintage, and the fullness of the skirt is very feminine and over the top. In retrospect, I might have chosen a different fabric because this one is a bit babyish, and the dress itself is already so feminine and flirty that I don't think it needed that feminine of a fabric. But it's still great. I love it.